Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to pull back the curtain and uncover the hidden environmental costs behind our fully stocked supermarkets. I mean, we all love the convenience, right? You walk into a brightly lit store, grab a carton of cold milk, maybe some fresh produce or a frozen pizza, and head home. But what does it actually take to keep that massive inventory perfectly chilled and ready for you? The answer is this incredibly complex, energy-hungry web that we almost never see.
Just picture this for a second. On one side, you've got the serene, well-lit, perfectly organized grocery aisles. But if you were to put on a pair of thermal or energy tracking glasses, that peaceful image totally shatters. You'd see these massive open refrigeration units constantly battling the ambient air temperature inside the store. And out back, a roaring, relentless fleet of delivery trucks burning through fuel on the highway just to keep those shelves stocked. The contrast between that quiet store and the massive energy-intensive logistics network that makes it all possible, it's absolutely staggering.
Okay, let's dive into this. What is the invisible cost of keeping your groceries cold? Because we aren't just talking about the monthly electric bill for the local store down the street. We're talking about a systemic, industry-wide footprint that exposes food retailers to massive regulatory and, frankly, financial risks.
To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to conduct a bit of a structured audit. We'll be covering 1. The grocery climate footprint. 2. Fueling the delivery fleet. 3. The invisible refrigerant threat. 4. Powering the supermarket grid. And 5. Measuring the real cost.
All right, part 1. The grocery climate footprint, formalizing the invisible.
Listen, tracking sustainability metrics in the food retail industry isn't just some feel-good PR exercise anymore. It's a rigorous, absolute accounting of financial liabilities. And this brilliantly illustrates how international accounting standards, like the SASB standards, which are now part of the IFRS Foundation, actually require food retailers to strictly report these environmental risks. These standards force companies to disclose information that could reasonably be expected to affect their cash flows, their access to finance, or their cost of capital. It grounds sustainability in hard financial reality.
Moving on to part 2, fueling the delivery fleet, the arteries of logistics.
Think about delivery fleets for a minute. They are literally the arteries of food logistics, moving products across vast distances from distribution centers right to your local retail locations. Now, because fuel consumption is a massive daily expense and carries incredibly heavy environmental regulatory exposure, the SASB standards demand that companies track their total fleet fuel consumption in gigajoules. But it goes further than that. They also have to precisely calculate the percentage of renewable fuel used. And by the way, that renewable fuel must be produced from biomass, it has to replace fossil fuels, and it has to achieve a net greenhouse gas emissions reduction on a life cycle basis. It's incredibly specific.
And that brings us to a really fascinating business trade-off: fossil fuel volatility versus renewable energy resiliency. Sure, the short-term capital expenditures required to invest in fuel-efficient fleets and new tech might seem pretty steep at first glance, but those upfront costs may be completely outweighed by long-term operational savings. By shifting away from traditional fuels, these retailers significantly decrease their exposure to unpredictable fossil fuel price spikes, not to mention future climate regulations.
Okay, part 3, the invisible refrigerant threat, or what I like to call the invisible blanket.
Let's pull off the highway for a second and walk back into the store, because we need to tackle the most potent yet probably least understood regulatory threat in the entire industry. We've got to break down Scope 1 emissions from refrigerants. This metric measures the direct greenhouse gas emissions from the equipment used to store and display perishable foods. And to be clear, this excludes fossil fuel combustion. We are talking purely about the chemicals leaking out of cooling systems, both the stationary units inside the store and the mobile units in the delivery trucks. Every single leaked metric ton is a potential regulatory fine and a severe climate hazard.
So, why are regulators so strict about this? Well, food retailers are specifically evaluated on their emissions of targeted gases under the Kyoto Protocol. A lot of common refrigerants out there, like HCFCs and HFCs, are highly potent greenhouse gases. Because they're so potent, releasing them triggers severe, internationally monitored climate change regulations. Regulators aren't messing around here. They frequently hit companies with steep penalties if they violate these emission standards.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is another metric companies are forced to report: the percentage of their consumed refrigerants that have zero ozone depleting potential, or ODP. This basically measures the chemical destruction a substance causes to the stratospheric ozone layer beyond natural reactions. Tracking this is absolutely critical for them because international regulations are actively trying to phase out ozone-depleting substances altogether.
Basically, if a retailer is relying on older, high ODP chemicals, they are sitting on a ticking regulatory time bomb. And here is a number that really puts it all into perspective: 100. When calculating these greenhouse gas emissions, the standards actually require companies to consolidate them into metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents using a 100-year global warming potential time horizon. This is based on guidelines published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So what does that mean? It means we aren't just looking at the impact of a leak today. Accountants are literally forced to calculate the warming impact that leaked gas is going to have on the atmosphere for the next century. Wild, right?
Which brings us to part 4, powering the supermarket grid, the energy islands.
If you pull back and look at the big picture, a retail store basically functions like a massive energy-hungry island. It requires intense heating, ventilation, air conditioning, constant lighting, and of course, relentless refrigeration. Because of this intense 24/7 demand, SASB metrics require retailers to expose exactly where they get their power. They have to report their total operational energy consumed in gigajoules and then visually slice that up, showing the percentage of standard grid electricity versus renewable energy. This totally exposes their reliance on the traditional grid and how vulnerable they might be to energy price fluctuations.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a very strict accounting hierarchy. Companies can't just claim they're using renewable energy because they feel like it. First, they have to report the total energy directly consumed. Second, they have to separate their grid electricity from self-generated renewables, like, say, rooftop solar panels. Third, any purchased renewable energy has to be through explicit power purchase agreements. The standard grid mix? Yeah, that doesn't count. The retailer must explicitly retain and retire renewable energy certificates or guarantees of origin. It's a highly regulated, tightly monitored chain of custody.
Finally, part 5, measuring the real cost. Really, we're talking about the future of food retail.
So, the crucial point is, we've explored the 3 big pillars of the grocery climate footprint here: fleet fuel, refrigerants, and energy. And quantifying these impacts in gigajoules and metric tons, it is not just environmental PR. It is core risk management. By demanding these specific metrics, investors and operators can clearly see which companies are actually prepared for a highly regulated future and which ones are just bleeding capital through inefficient fleets and leaky, outdated refrigeration systems.
As the standard itself perfectly summarizes, efficiencies gained in fuel use can reduce costs, mitigate exposure to fossil fuel price volatility, and limit the carbon footprint. I mean, that hits the nail right on the head. It highlights the undeniable overlap between financial performance and environmental impact. Doing rigorous sustainability accounting transforms an invisible environmental risk into a measurable, manageable reward. Companies that boost their energy efficiency and lean into alternative energy sources don't just reduce emissions, they are actively increasing their profitability by cutting expenses.
Which leaves us with this final thought. The next time you're walking down the frozen food aisle and you feel that sudden rush of cold air, ask yourself, what hidden costs are you really paying for? Is it just the price tag on the food, or is it the cost of an invisible, incredibly energy-hungry logistics grid powering away behind the scenes? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helps you look at your local supermarkets in a completely new light. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.